Hello guys, and welcome to our maiden tutorial. Hopefully it's going to be the first of many in our journey to actually get to know our bones. So in the study of our bones, we'll be coming across a lot of terminologies that we'll be using quite often, and whenever we use them, we expect that you're able to relate to them and also to get the understanding we are trying to put across, right? So the primary purpose of this tutorial is to actually get us to be able to understand and then to be able to familiarize ourselves with these terminology so that whenever we use them, we get whatever we are trying to put across. Okay. So we are basically aiming to do the anatomy of the bones and then know its clinical correlates. And then in anatomy, you'll be looking at different parts of the bones and you'll be looking at different relations of the bones. And in the usage of terms to actually describe these relations, you are actually expected to be able to use accurate terms and then pinpoint terms so that you're able to accurately describe and then precisely describe whatever thing you are talking about, right? So the terminologies that are used to actually precisely describe anything you want to talk about are basically what we'll be looking at in this tutorial. So we have before us a model of the human body. This is a male model, and then we will zoom right into it. So the human body is primarily divided into three parts: the head and neck, the trunk, and then the limbs. The limbs are into the upper and lower limbs. So the head and neck is basically the part within this first box. The trunk is also basically the parts here, and then the limbs comprising the upper limb and then the lower limb. Okay, so these are basically the parts of the body, and this semester you'll be looking more at the upper limbs as well as the lower limbs, and then the axial skeleton, okay, sorry, or the trunk. Forgive me. So, and the trunk, but then the head and neck stuff will largely be done or dealt with next semester, that is MB2 second semester. Okay, so now looking at the limbs, as I said, the limbs are into the upper limbs and then the lower limbs. We've always heard people say my hand is paining me, my leg is paining me, and all those stuff. But then at the end of this tutorial, I expect that when someone talks about hand or when someone mentions hand, your mind actually tunes to a specific aspect of our upper limb. The hand is not the entire upper limb, and then we expect that at the end of this tutorial, you're able to appreciate that. So the upper limb is primarily divided into three parts. Okay, so we have the arm, that is the parts of the upper limb between the shoulder and then the elbow. Okay, that's the arm. And then the part of the upper limb between the elbow and then the wrist is the forearm. And then the part of the upper limb from the wrist going to the tip of your fingers is basically called the hand, or the hand and wrist in most cases. Okay, so we have here the arm, the forearm, and then the hand. Okay, so these are the three parts of the. So whenever someone says hand, your mind should go to the part of the upper limb distal to the wrist, and then whenever someone says forearm, your mind should go to the part of the upper limb between the elbow as well as the wrist, and then the arm should actually tune your mind to the part of the upper limb between the elbow and then the shoulders. Okay, so now it's the same thing for the lower limb. The lower limb too is primarily into three parts. We have the thigh. Okay, we have the thigh. We also have the leg, and then we have the foot. Okay, so the thigh is practically the part of the upper limb, sorry, the lower limb between the hip joint as well as the knee, and then between the knee and the ankle is your leg, and then from your ankle going to the tip of your toes is your foot. Okay, so we have here our leg, and then from our leg, from our ankle to the tip of our toes is our foot. Okay, so it's important to know these demarcations. So from now on, when we are saying, okay, so this is a bone of the hand, this is a bone of the arm, this is a bone of the forearm, we expect that your mind goes to actually these areas. All right. So the next thing we'll be looking at are some planes, okay, some anatomical planes that we'll be talking about quite often. Okay, so usually when you want to explore okay so usually when you want to explore the body and then its contents, you sometimes find it more convenient cutting the body along specific planes so that you're able to get better views of structures of interest. Okay, so we have three primary planes that we'll be looking at, and then these are the sagittal plane. So the sagittal plane is basically a plane along the midline. Okay, forgive me, this is now along the midline. It's intended to be along the midline. I think I got this one right. Okay, so there's the sagittal plane. So when you divide the body like that, some people also call it the mid sagittal plane, because we also have other ones that could fall outside the plane of the midline, in which case we'll be calling them the parasagittal planes. Okay, so that's the parasagittal plane. So the one in the middle is the mid sagittal plane, and then these ones are the parasagittal planes. Okay, we also have the horizontal plane. The horizontal plane is also called a transverse plane, and then this transverse plane goes like that. Okay, so it could be a transverse plane to the one, two. So it could be a transverse plane to the maybe arm. Okay, it could be a transverse plane to the forearm. It could be a transverse plane to the neck. Okay, but basically whenever you have a horizontal plane like that, it's called a transverse plane. And then we also have so we also have the third plane. So we also have here the third plane, and that plane is more like this. Okay, so the third plane is in this along this line. Okay, I still didn't get it right, but I think it paints the picture right. So that's along this line. It divides the body into the front and back, so it's called the frontal plane, and in other words it can also be called the coronal plane. So the sagittal plane, especially the mid sagittal plane, divides the body into left and right, and then the coronal plane divides the body into front and back, right? Okay, so sorry. So we've seen that. So basically, these are our planes: our horizontal, transverse, or also known as transverse, our sagittal, parasagittal ones, which are basically modifications of the sagittal plane, and then the coronal plane or the frontal plane. Okay. So now the next thing we are going to look at is the anatomical position. Okay. So there is something called anatomical position, and it is very important because it's an arbitrary position that the human body is imagined in. Okay, so whenever we say something is maybe behind another thing, when we say something is on top of another thing, when we say something is deep to something, or whenever we describe the position of something, we say that with the anatomical position in mind. Okay, so the anatomical position is when one is standing flat footed. Okay, in this case, because it's a 3D model that is allowing us to actually view the different parts of the body, they didn't let the person stand attention, okay, or they didn't let the person or the model stand with the legs together. But in the anatomical position, your legs are together, so you're standing flat footed, legs together, gaze forward. Okay, you can see how this man is looking straight forward, chin up, his chin is up, and then palms facing forward. Okay, palms facing forward, and this is anatomical position. So whenever we say something is superior to something, we are saying that with this position in mind. Okay, so for instance, when someone puts their hand on their shoulder, okay, you don't say the hand is superior to the shoulder. When I say hand, I mean hand, not your upper limb. When I say hand, so when someone puts their hand on their shoulder, you don't say the hand is superior to the shoulder. No, the person has only done that, but then it doesn't necessarily mean that the hand is superior to the shoulder. But then whenever we look or whenever we mention the terminologies we're about to study, we mention them with this in mind. So you might want to have a closer look. So like that. So that's all right. So now the next thing we are going to look at are the reference terms. Okay, so the reference terms are basically how we describe stuff in reference to the other. Okay, how we describe something in reference to the other, in reference to their position and all those stuff. Okay, so now, as I said, we have the mid sagittal plane which passes through the midline like that. Okay, so in the anatomical position, we keep in mind the mid sagittal plane, and then anything lying along this mid sagittal plane is said to be in the median plane, or yes, or the median line or the midline. Okay, so in this case, you can see that the penis is in the midline. You can see that the nose or the bridge of the nose is in the midline. You can also see the we've not studied the bones yet, but there's a bone at the chest region between the two breasts. Okay, and that is known as the breastbone or the sternum. You can also appreciate that that is in the midline. We can see the Adam's apple. The Adam's apple is in the midline. You can see all those stuff in the midline. Okay, so they are called, the term we are talking about here is median. So when you say something is median, it necessarily has to be in this midline. Okay, all right. And then now the next thing we want to look at is medial and lateral. The terms medial and lateral basically are used with reference to the midline. Okay, so I'm going to name different parts. So A, okay. Oh wow. Okay, so let me take a circle, and then so looking at this circle, okay, and then another circle like this. Okay, okay, these two circles. So let's call this one circle A and call this one circle B. So circle A, and then this circle, well, B. Okay, so we say, using the terms medial and lateral, we say circle A is medial to circle B because circle A is closer to the midline than circle B. Okay, so if circle A were exactly on the midline, okay, if circle A were exactly on the midline, we would say circle A is a midline structure. Okay, but then because it's not in the midline, but then it's closer to the midline with reference to circle B, we say that circle A is medial to circle B. And in other words, you can also see circle B is lateral to circle A. So these are the terms that we want to look at: medial and lateral. Anything medial is closer to the midline than the other, and anything lateral is closer to the, or is farther from the midline than the other. So looking at the anatomical position like this, we can see our delegates. This our little finger or our pinky finger. Then there's our thumb. Okay, so we can say our pinky finger is medial to our thumb. Okay, our thumb is the most lateral of all five fingers. Okay, so all of our digits, all five digits, are in such a way that our thumb is the most lateral, our pinky finger is the most medial. We say the ring finger is medial to the middle finger. Okay, we say, sorry, to the middle finger. Okay, and then we can also see that, let's say, the eyes, okay, are medial to the ears. All right. So as you can see, the eyes are medial to the ears because they are closer to the midline than the ears. So the words here are medial and lateral. Okay. So now the next thing we want to look at are anterior and posterior. Okay. So looking at anterior and posterior. Oh wow. Okay. So in the meantime, ignore the line there. We'll be using it when we come back. So anterior and posterior is basically with reference to front and back. Okay. So when something is in front of another thing, we say that thing is anterior. So looking from the side here, we can see the eyes are anterior to the ears because the eyes are at the front, or they are in front of the ears. All right. So the eyes are anterior to the ears. We can say the breast is anterior to, let's say, the shoulders. Okay. We can also say maybe the penis is anterior to the butts or the buttocks. Okay, we are now getting into the start. That's why I'm trying to use our routine words. Don't worry. Those who speak entirely the language of anatomy. All right. So now the next words we want to look at, or the next terminology we want to look at, are superior and inferior. Okay. So when we say something is superior to another, then it means that thing is above the other. Okay. So okay. So now looking at, let's say, the I'm coming the penis, okay, and then the breast. So the penis and then the breast. We say the breast is superior to the penis. Okay. We say the lip is superior to the breast. But we say the breast is inferior to the lip. The penis is inferior to the breast. But sorry. And we say the eye is superior to the nose. Okay. And then the nose is superior to the lip. But then the lip is inferior to the nose. The nose is also inferior to the eye. All right. Okay. So that's also important for us to note. And one thing to also note is that, oh wait. Okay. So when we get to proximal and distal, all right. Proximal and distal, I'll tell you something very important. Okay. So now the next terminology we are looking at is cranial and caudal. Okay. Cranial and caudal. Cranial basically talks about cranium, and it means like head. All right. And then the caudal there means tail. Okay, it's like head and tail. So when we say something is cranial, then it means that thing is more closely related to the head, or closer to the head than a caudally related something. Okay, so a cranially placed thing, like maybe the nose. Okay, we can say the nose is cranial to, let's say, the chin. All right, we can say the chin is cranial to the breast is cranial to the um penis. All right, so looking at this stuff, you can see that saying something is cranial can maybe to some extent be similar to saying something is superior. All right, but then the difference is that usually cranial and caudal, that terminology is employed in embryology. Okay, embryology is basically the study of the development of human. Okay, of the human body. It can also be of a different organism. All right, but then when you're studying those stuff, that's usually when you see cranial and caudal. But then in any case, when you see cranial and caudal in gross anatomy too, you should be able to relate to that. All right. And then in that same vein, we can see the penis is caudal to the breast is caudal to the chin is caudal to the nose. All right. And the next thing we are looking at is, we have it here, the proximal and distal. So I was talking about proximal and distal. Proximal is more like proximity, right? Proximity, and then distal is like distance, right? So when we say something is proximal, it means that thing is closer to, and then when we say something is distal, we say that thing is more distance from something. Okay, so when you take, and then one thing about the proximal and distal is that they are usually used when we are talking about the limbs. Okay, so as I said earlier, the limbs, we have the upper limbs here, and then we have the lower limbs. Okay, the upper limb and lower limb. So when we are talking in terms of upper limb and lower limb, we usually like to say proximal to distal to than saying maybe something is superior to and inferior to. Because for example, when you open your arms out wide, okay, it will be difficult to know what is superior and what is inferior. Okay, it's more like something closer to the axial skeleton than another thing. All right, so as I said earlier, proximal and distal are terminologies usually used with reference to structures related to the limbs. All right. And then superior and inferior is more commonly used with structures related to the um trunk. Okay. So with the trunk, with the head and neck, we have superior and inferior used more often there. Okay. So when we say um the elbow, okay, is proximal to the wrist. Okay. So we can see the elbow is proximal to the wrist. And when we say that, we mean the elbow is closer to the trunk than the wrist. And one thing you should notice is that whenever we use proximal and distal, as I said, we use them in reference to our limbs. And because of that, we say something is proximal when that thing is closer to the trunk. Okay. So anything on the limbs that is closer to the trunk than another thing, okay, would be proximal than the other thing. All right. So when you look at this circle like this, so we can call this circle 1 and then circle 2. Okay, so circle 1 is proximal to circle 2, and then circle 2 is distal to circle 1. Okay, so in the same way, we can say the knee joint, okay, is proximal to the ankle joint, and then we can say the ankle joint is distal to the knee joint. Okay. So in the usage of these things, you should be able to relate to all those stuff. All right. So now the next thing we're going to look at is ventral and dorsal. Okay. So when we say something is ventral, it basically talks about the front of the body. So anything here is ventral. Anything more towards this side is dorsal. Okay. We are not saying, wait, let me put this thing on before it creates confusion. Okay. So there's the dorsal line and there's the ventral line. Anything closer to this line is dorsal, and anything closer to this line is ventral. Okay, so when you take two structures like this, maybe point A, sorry, point A and then point B. Okay, we can say point A, so let's, or point 1 and point 2. Okay, so we can say point 1 is dorsal to point 2. Okay, and then we can say point 2 is ventral to point 1. In the same way, when you have another point here, say point 3 and then maybe point 4. Okay, so point 3, point 4. All right, so point 4. All right, so point 1 is dorsal to point 2, point 2 is dorsal to point 3, point 3 is dorsal to point 4.
In the same way, point 4 is ventral to point 3, point 3 is ventral to point 2, point 2 is ventral to point 1. In the same way, point 3 is ventral to point 1. Okay, so basically you can also see that the dorsal and ventral, they are almost closely related to posterior and anterior, right? But then in the same way, dorsal and ventral is also more employed in embryological situations than in gross anatomy. Okay, but then in gross anatomy too, you would meet ventral and dorsal to some extent. All right. I'm not saying they are entirely restricted to embryology. They can also be used in gross anatomy. All right. So let's try to make this snappy. So okay, so back to our frontal view. So now the next ones we are looking at palmar and dorsal. Okay, so interestingly, palmar also goes with dorsal, just like ventral goes with dorsal. But then palmar, as the name goes, is related to just the palm. Okay, so when you have okay, when you have anything here within your palm, okay, that thing is palmar. And then when you have something at the back of your palm, that thing is what? Dorsal. So palmar is anything of or relating to the palm, and then anything posterior or to the back of the hand is dorsal. All right. In the same way, to when we go to the lower limb, we have dorsal, that is this part, and then plantar. Okay, so in this case, we don't call it palmar, we call it plantar. So maybe the mnemonic you can use to remember that is maybe imagine yourself stepping on a growing plant. Okay, a small plant that is growing, you step on it and then you just crush it against the ground. So it is the sole of your feet that you use to step on it, right? So that is the plantar part of your foot. And then now the dorsal part will be this part. Okay, all right. So we've seen plantar and dorsal as well as palmar and dorsal. Okay, so now the next thing is we should also note that there could be combinations with this stuff. Okay, there could be combinations. So something could be maybe inferior-lateral. Okay, so when you have something at this point, okay, and then you have something at this point, okay, so you have this, also have that. So points or circle 1 and circle 2, right? So circle 2 is inferior-lateral because first of all it's inferior and then it's also lateral, right? So inferior and then lateral. So inferior lateral to point 1. So point 2 is inferior lateral to point 1, whilst point 1 is what? Superior medial to point 2. You get it? So point 2 is inferior lateral. So basically I'm talking about how you can have combinations of these words used, right? Okay. So then the next thing is cutaneous. Okay, so right now we are looking at the skin. So when I tap this point like this, or maybe, oh sorry, so you can see the highlighted part, that's the blue part. The name there is what? Male skin. Okay, male skin of the foot. So the skin of the foot for the male. All right, so anything of or pertaining to the skin is called cutaneous. So if the thing is in the skin, it's cutaneous. All right. And then if anything is not in the skin but then it's closer to the skin compared to another thing, then you can call that thing superficial. Okay, so we have cutaneous, that is anything of or relating to the skin, and then anything superficial is closer to the skin. If the thing is farther from the skin, that thing is deep. So let me give you a classic example. So here we have the skeleton here. I'm going to include all muscles, okay? And then I'm also going to include the integumentary system. Okay, that's the skin and the likes. So when you look at the person like this, so I said anything all four pertaining to the skin is well cutaneous. And then when we take away the integumentary system, you start to see the stuff which are what deeper to the skin or below the skin. Okay. So now when you take a look at the stuff below the skin, let me take away all our ligaments. I want it to be very understandable for us. Okay. So now let's go to the forearm. Okay. The hand is a very complex region. Because you are starting now, I don't want us to get confused. So looking at the forearm like this, we took away the skin and then now we are looking at the stuff, the muscles below the skin. So this muscle like this is superficial because it's just lying under the skin. Okay. And then when I fade it out, you can see another muscle deep to it. Okay. And then that muscle we say is deep to this muscle because this muscle is superficial, that is under the skin, and then under this muscle we have deep, or under this muscle we have another muscle there, and that muscle is supposed to be the deep muscle. So this muscle is what the brachioradialis muscle, and then when you take that away you can now see the deeper muscle. Okay, so let's bring the muscle back. Brachioradialis, when it's there you can't see the lateral part of this muscle. Okay, you can see that this muscle is hidden under the brachioradialis muscle, but then when we take this muscle and we fade it out you can see the rest of this muscle. Okay, so let's just take this one out, and then now we can see this muscle here, that is our pronator teres muscle. Okay. So we can take that one too out, and then you see another muscle here, muscles which are deep to stuff. Okay, so when we see something is deep to another thing, then it means that thing is what underneath that thing, the other thing that we are talking about. All right, so now back to our foot part. So the next thing we want to look at is supine and prone. Okay, so this is usually with reference to a lying position as well as maybe a position of your hand. Okay, so when you show your hand, okay, so that the palms are facing forwards like this, we see the hand has been supinated, or the hand is in the supine position. Okay, so when I say hand I mean hand. All right. So the hand is in the supine position. So when you turn your forearm, okay, so that your hand now faces, like the back of your hand faces forwards, that is the prone position. Okay. Because maybe it can be difficult to, let me see, then I'll try to see if I can show you a video of pronation and supination, but then basically this is how it is. So in the anatomical position the hands are supine. Okay, they're in the supine position, or we say the forearm is supinated. Okay, because when you want to pronate or supinate your hand, the action actually goes on at the forearm. All right, we'll come to see that too soon. All right, and then now in a lying position, okay, when you are lying down, all right, when you're lying so that your forwards, okay, your front is facing up, we say you are lying in the what supine position. All right, when you're lying so that your forward is facing up, we say you're lying in the supine position. But in the same way too, when you're lying so that your back is facing up, we say you're lying in the prone position. Okay, so you want to note that one too as well. Yeah, so now that's about it for terminologies and our reference terms. All right, but now we are going to look at bone markings. Okay, bone markings. We are going to, in the near future, look at some of the bones that will be needing for this semester. But then in the study of the bones, you are required to know specific features of the bones. Okay, so you are required to know, let me take our muscles off. And then let's also take the central nervous system out. Okay, so that we are left with just, let's even take our ligaments out, so that we are left with just the bones. Okay, so we have a view of our entire skeleton here. Okay, so for the bone markings, okay, so you'll be seeing the bone is not a uniform solid structure, okay, that one is joined to the other is joined to the other to form the entire body. No, it actually has some bumps on it. It has some swellings on it. Maybe swelling is just maybe out of place, but then I'm just saying that to give you a picture that maybe you might have bumps on it, you might have depressions on it, you might have um elevations, you might have like hollows and all those stuff. You can even have an entire hole through a bone. Okay, and then these stuff have names. When you meet a hollow in a bone like this, okay, at this point, the hollow at this point, okay, so now the hollow here is called something for foramen. Okay, I want to be okay, so the hole here is called something foramen because you can see that this is the bone. Okay, this is the bone, and then within the bone you have this hollow. Okay, in the same way too, within these bones you have these hollows in there, and because both of them are holes to bones, they are called foramina. Okay, that's the plural for the word foramen. Okay, so the word is foramen, foramen, and then the plural is foramina. So a foramen basically talks about a hole in a bone, a hole in a bone. When you have the hole inside a bone, it's a foramen. Okay, no matter where the hole is. Sometimes you might see a hole and then they want to call it something else, but then when it's a bone and then you have a hole in it, it is a foramen. Okay, so those are some of the bone markings and features that we'll be looking at, and then foramen is just one to actually cite an example. All right, so now we are getting right into it. So we have crest. Okay, the crest. So as I said, for the bones, we have elevations and we have depressions. The elevations, we have different types. We have crest, we have tubercles, we have tuberosities, trochanter, we have malleolus. You can even have a line and all those stuff, right? But then you can even have a process as well. But then all this stuff, it depends on their shapes as well as the degree of protrusion. All right. So when you take a crest like this, a crest is a kind of faint, how do you call it? A faint elevation. Okay, a faint elevation. So now we are looking at the head here, and this is our occipital bone. Okay, so this is our occipital bone, and then you can see this. Okay, you can see. Oh, let me bring in my drawing stuff. So we can see this elevation here, right? So this is a crest. Okay, so it's called the external occipital crest. External occipital crest, because right now we are looking at it at the macro scale. They will not give us the specific name of this thing, but it's called the external occipital crest. Okay, so as I said, we have a lot of markings and features on bones. Some could be depression, some could be holes, some could be elevations. But then for the elevations, we have different types of them. For the depressions, too, we have different types of them. And basically, for an elevation like this, it's a crest. Okay, and then the next elevation we want to look at is sorry, undo. Sorry. Okay, let's go back and take all this stuff out. Okay, so we still have here our skeleton. Okay, and then so we're showing the crest, and then now the next thing we're going to look at is a tubercle. Okay, so a tubercle is also, as I said, an elevation, but then it's a bump. So when you take a bone like this, like the ulna, okay, looking at the ulna, turning it upside down, and then oh, this is not quite accurate. But then when you go to the lateral aspect of the ulna, okay, so when you look at the ulna like this, I don't know whether that was what they were trying to show with this bump. I don't know whether that's what they were trying to show with this bump here. But then we have something called the conoid tubercle. Okay, conoid tubercle. But then it's also an elevation. And we also have something called tuberosity. Okay. And a tuberosity, for example, is what we have here. Here. Okay. Okay, so we have here one tuberosity, and we also have here another tuberosity. So these are swellings that you will come across. We just need to keep in mind that you can have a lot of swellings. Maybe in one case you might call that swelling a tuberosity, you might call another one a tubercle and all those stuff, right? But then basically a tubercle should be a tubercle should be um bigger than a tuberosity. Okay, sorry, a tuberosity should be bigger than a tubercle. Let's note that was a mess up there. So a tuberosity should be bigger than a tubercle. A crest is also an elevation, but usually a linear elevation, a fine one. All right, so we should know that too. And then trochanter. So trochanter, okay, there's a trochanter, an even bigger elevation. Okay, okay, it's out of place, but you can see here. Let's isolate this bone. So this our femur, okay, and then so there's one trochanter, there's another one like that. So we call them the greater and the lesser trochanters. Okay, so there's the greater trochanter, and then there's the lesser trochanter. Okay, so trochanter is also an elevation. You can see that one too, and then trochanter is also bigger than a tuberosity. All right. So now the next word to look at is malleolus. Okay, malleolus. Malleolus is spelled as Malleolus. Malleolus. So malleolus basically is to describe our ankle bones. Okay, the projections at our ankle. So we have the let me draw. So we have the ankle joint here, and then you can see the medial elevation here. You can also see the lateral elevation here, the bones that you can feel at your ankle. So we have the medial one being the medial malleolus, and then the lateral one being the lateral malleolus. Okay, so you can see how we're already using the terminologies that we just learned, medial and lateral. Medial because it's closer to the midline, and then the lateral one is further away from the midline, so it's called the lateral. Okay, all right. So now the next one we want to look at is line. Okay, so a line, we might also have to isolate our femur again. Okay, a line is also an elevation. Okay, and we should no, that's not what we want to look at. Okay, so a line. Okay, so between our greater and then our lesser, so between our greater and then our lesser trochanters, you can see this line. Okay, a line linking them. might not be very accurately represented here, but then you can see this line linking them, right? So that elevation there. So a line is basically an elongated elevation, a linear elongation. That is a line. But all of these ones I've talked about so far are elevations. But then we have different types, different sizes, different shapes, and all those stuff. All right. So now, getting away from the elevations, now we are going to look at condyle. Okay. So a condyle is basically an articular surface. Okay. A condyle is basically an articular surface. The bone we have here is the femur, and then this is the part of the femur that articulates with the tibia. All right. So it's called the femoral condyle, and this is the medial condyle. Okay, let me annotate. Okay, so this is the medial condyle, and then there's the lateral condyle. So these parts are the parts that actually sit on the condyles of the tibia, all right, for articulation. The interaction between two different bones is called an articulation. Okay, so that's how the knee joint is formed. Okay, so a condyle is basically an articular surface. Okay, an epicondyle is so an epicondyle is basically, so you can see our condyle here, and then just lateral to it, just above superior lateral to it, you can see our epicondyles, right? So the epicondyles are, as the name shows, epi. When you hear epi, it means on top of. So epicondyle. So these are the epicondyles. Epicondyles are not necessarily articular surfaces. You should note that. So the condyles are the articular surfaces. All right. Okay. We almost lost our skeleton, but then we have it back. So now the next word to look at is a facet. Okay. So a facet is also an articular surface. All right. So for a facet, maybe we might want to take one of the vertebral body bones, right? And then isolate them. So taking the vertebral bone. Oh, mhm, mhm. So this bone, as we can see, we took it from the vertebral column, and then it has this facet. Okay, this part for articulation with the vertebral bone on top. Okay, so the vertebra on top articulates with this one by means of this facet, and we call it the superior articular facet. So this facet, superior articular facet. So this facet, as I said, is also an articular surface, and then it articulates with the inferior articular facet of the vertebral body, or the vertebra on top of this one. Okay, so we are almost done, and I've already explained foramen, right? So foramen is a hole within a bone. And then now the next thing is a fossa. Okay, a fossa is like a depression. Okay, so right now where we are, the closest fossa here is this depression. This depression here. Okay, the depression here. Let me put it into perspective. Okay, so you can see it's sitting within the ilium. So the bone here is the ilium. Okay, and this forms part of the pelvic girdle. And then that depression there is called the iliac fossa. Okay, the iliac fossa, some may call it. So that's the iliac fossa. So fossa is a depression. you have a lot of fossa in the body, a lot of them, and anytime you hear fossa, your mind should go to a depression. Okay, so another fossa here is this one. Okay, this one here. Okay, so this the coronoid fossa. Okay, this is the coronoid fossa. Another one is at the back here. We already have this bone fitting in there. Okay, so this fossa here, this depression here, within which the head of the bone sits. Okay, that's the olecranon fossa. Okay, and so a fossa is basically a depression, and we should know that. So the next thing we have is a sulcus. Okay, a sulcus. A sulcus is basically a linear depression, unlike a line which is a linear elevation. A sulcus is a linear depression. So looking at this bone, this is just to show the parts of the bone. Okay, so we already talked about this part. We talked about this part as the tubercles, right? The greater and lesser tubercles. This is the greater tubercle, and this is the lesser tubercle. And then between these tubercles is this elongated depression. Because it's been colored, you might not see it as a depression, but then it's actually a depression. And this is called the intertubercular sulcus, okay, or intertubercular groove. All right, intertubercular sulcus. A groove and a sulcus are closely related to intertubercular sulcus, and it makes sense because it lies between two tubercles. We'll look at that when we get there. All right. And this is just to demonstrate a sulcus. And then now the next thing is a spine. Okay, so spine. The closest spine here is the spine of the scapula. The spine of the scapula. Okay, so this elevation. Okay, can see how. Oh, sorry. Can see how it is. Unfortunately, the drawing has fallen out of the picture, but you can see how it's projected. And another spine is the spine of the vertebrae. Okay, the spine of the vertebrae is a very elongated projection. Okay, so when you have an elongated projection like that, it's more appropriately called a spine. Okay, let's do this under an hour. So now the next two terms and we are done. So a process. So a process, yes. So we have oh sorry. So let's isolate this bone. Okay, there's a scapula. Isolating this bone, you can see this part of the scapula, right? You can see this part, this hook here. Okay, hook here. So that hook there is also an elevation, as you know, as you can see, it's an elevation. It's literally a projection, and because of how long it is, it's called a process. All right. So, so for the vertebrae too, I showed the spinous process as an example of a spine, right? So it makes sense that a process almost looks like a spine. They are both very long projections. And then now the last thing we want to look at is a notch. Okay. So a notch, to some extent, it can be there for articulation. It can also be there for passage of something. But then basically a notch is a depression. You should have, okay, it falls under the depressions here. So a notch is a depression. Okay, so a typical example is when you take the ulnar bone. All right, so this is the ulnar bone, and then the ulnar bone articulates with the radial bone. So this is the radius and this is the ulnar. Okay, so when you take the radial bone, actually at the distal part, you can see, let's isolate the bone, and you can see how the ulnar, so the ulnar would have been here, right? The ulnar bone would have been here, and then it would articulate with the radius like this. It would articulate with the radius this way, right? So this notch, this depression here, okay, for articulation with the ulnar bone is the ulnar notch. Okay, the ulnar notch of the radius. So this is the radius, and then this is the ulnar, a schematic of the ulnar, and then the ulnar would articulate with the radius distally at the ulnar notch of the radius. You get that? Huh. So we can see better the notch here. So you can see that's a notch. So that's the notch. Okay, this is the notch. All right. So now the last thing
is the notch, and we've looked at that. So thank you so much for sticking and staying with me all through this tutorial. Unfortunately, it had to take almost an hour, but then at the end of this, we hope that we've been able to look at the most important terminologies that we'll be coming across, and all the best as we start with our bones.